I started falsifying the COVID cards. Then it got out of control where it just became much bigger than I thought, where I had 150 desperate crying people at my door.
How many people did you not jab?
Over 4,000. This guy came in one day and he said, I need my second dose, but I'm not going to pay for it. I'm going to be coming around once a month and you're not going to charge us anything. And I said, look, I'm not playing this game with you. Get off my property or I'm going to call the cops on you. Cops came and then the DA offered him immunity if he testified against me.
Wow.
We take all kinds of callers on Hardly Legal.
Innocent, guilty.
And then there's something in between, and that's what we have for you today. Sit tight. This is a long one, but it's worth the watch. Wednesday, you are on the Hardly Legal show. What legal situation are you dealing with?
Okay, so first of all, happy Friday the 13th, so there's that. It's important to remember the context. So I'm going to start by saying you have to keep in mind, I was a first-time offender with a clean record, beige, boring soccer mom, pediatric nurse. So, this is all going through this without ever thinking I'd ever be in a situation like this.
Sure.
I was working in New York during COVID. My husband was a police officer in the city. And it basically, we were all working 16-hour shifts. It was horrendous. And for a year and a half, we were all the heroes. And then all of a sudden, they had the COVID vaccine and New York gave different professions, like first it would be the cops, and then a couple of weeks later it'd be the nurses, then it'd be, firefighters, EMTs, all these people. But they would get this 14-day notice that they had to have the COVID vaccine or they would lose their jobs, they would lose their pensions, they would lose everything.
Yeah.
And, a lot of us felt like, we weren't home baking sourdough bread on Zoom calls during COVID. We had a very different pandemic experience.
Right.
And we had been working every day, getting exposed to COVID, getting COVID, that if anybody deserved the right to decide whether or not to get the vaccine, we did, because we had already lived a reality of going and getting exposed to it. Being in the medical field, I was already seeing medical journal reports coming out of Israel of red flag signals about problems with the vaccine. So of course, I have my own concerns, but everybody had their concerns. They're like, well, not that I'm against it. I think part of it was only the 14-day notice, giving people time to process it, feel more comfortable about the decision. And, I've always felt that, the best way to make people doubt something is to mandate it anyway. I'm not anti-vaccine. I'm not someone who's like, oh, I'm never going to get that COVID vaccine. It was more about, this isn't the way to do it. If you mandate it, you're going to cause a lot of problems. So, and then I was flooded with a lot of essential frontline workers who were either patients' families, friends and families, that were just terrified because they were going to lose their livelihoods overnight. And I had access. So, of course, I crossed the line and I started falsifying the COVID cards. And so
tell us when you say falsifying the cards, dig into that.
Okay, so what I basically did is that, I had a pediatric primary care practice and I got tapped to provide COVID vaccines because they had just cleared it for 12 and up. So, and yet for some strange reason, people who were happy to go in a drive-through parking lot at a 7-Eleven to get their COVID vaccine weren't comfortable doing that for their children. There wasn't good pickup. So they said, well, maybe parents would feel better if getting their kids the vaccine in a pediatric office.
So I just want to make sure I understand. You're against 7-Eleven vaccines for kids.
Maybe drive-through,
If you go in and get a Slurpee, it's okay, but...
or you get a free, New York was doing things like, well, free Slurpee, free cheeseburger and fries if you get a COVID vaccine, because we're all about health and following science.
What's the limit on that? How many times can you get that?
Well, they say now the COVID vaccine, people I friends that still work in the medical field, it's like 4 times a year.
Oh,
it's
wow.
like every 3 to 4 months.
Wow.
And in fact, the CDC just added 3 doses of the COVID vaccine to the pediatric schedule by 9 months of age. So
you were falsifying.
Yeah, so somebody would come in. Yeah, somebody would come in. They would schedule a COVID vaccine. And it would be just me and them in the room. And, we had our sort of cryptic language and all that. And once I realized
Like,
that
give me an
they,
Yeah,
example.
yeah, yeah. Okay, okay.
Give me an example of how you would communicate with someone.
I've
To
several questions first. Okay,
jump in.
so yeah, this is a industry that I didn't know existed. I now have so many questions. I
I
feel
saw one comment on some social media that some guy in New York City saying, "Damn, I didn't make nearly that much selling drugs. I was in the wrong business."
okay. So first off, these you weren't were you faking it for kids or were like grown firefighters and cops showing up with a
They
boo
were
boo?
all they were essential frontline workers. They
Okay.
were cops, firefighters.
Did
Yeah.
they get a lollipop at the end?
Well, I only provided organic fruit juice lollipops,
Okay.
so of course, and a fairly cute Band-Aid.
Okay.
It
So tell
started with parents, and then parents would call me and say, "Hey, my brother's going to lose his job.
I
My
want the
mom,
first one. I want the first non-family member. I want you to explain to me how the first time that this transaction happened. Did they ask you, "Hey, could you just say you gave it to me and I still pay you?" Like walk me through the first time you crossed the line and you falsified the document.
Okay. All right. So, I'd have a family say, "Hey, my brother just got on the job. He's a cop. He's going to lose his job. He's married. His wife's going to lose her job. She's a nurse. They're expecting their first baby. And can you help them out?" And that, the way that you help me out. And I said, "Okay, well, have them call and make an appointment and make sure they list that you referred them."
Who's
And
oh,
then
wait, wait, wait. But that's still not the first one. I want patient zero. Like how did the first time that you even cuz did you pitch it or did the patient ask you to do it?
the patients asked, like the patient's parents would say, because I would say, "Look, I'm going to have the COVID vaccine available." And they were like, "Well, I have to get this vaccine or I'm going to lose my job." And
Okay.
and we knew the mandates were coming down. We knew
Yeah.
that. So, they were like, "I don't really want to get it." I said, "Okay, well, you come in the room with me. It's just me and you." And, basically I draw it up. I got the lot number. I got, yeah, I wasted. The syringe goes in the sharps box. The alcohol swab is in the garbage because they ended up going through my garbage, and I knew they probably would be going through my garbage. So the only thing that was different was the needle didn't quite touch the arm. I'd squirt it in the garbage can, and then I'd slap a Band-Aid on their arm, and they'd walk out saying, "Oh my God, my arm hurts so much."
They
And you
said
have to
their arm
remember,
hurts?
It
well,
did hurt. Yeah, it swelled up a
yeah.
little.
Well, you
You've never,
also
yeah, acting class. Come on.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
but you also have to remember, and this is kind of interesting. In 2019, the summer of 2019, before anyone had heard of COVID, New York did some sweeping changes in the law. They took away the religious exemption for children in school. And then one of the other things is they mandated a vaccine registry. So when everybody during COVID was talking about, "Oh my God, they want vaccine passports, they want vaccine registries," New York had already done that a year before, which is kind of interesting timing, in my opinion. But they had already had the infrastructure in place that legally every vaccine that a medical provider administers to a patient, they have to then put that in the state database. So you'd have to go at the end of the day or whenever, you go in the state database and you would enter all the vaccines you gave to the patients with their name, so that then they could go somewhere because they had created an app called the Excelsior app on your phone, so that if you ever needed to go anywhere and you needed to show proof of vaccination, you could pull up your Excelsior app and it would link to the registry and they would say, "Oh, good, okay, you've had your vaccines."
No, I'm no
So
doctor. I'm no doctor. What would happen if you faked the vaccine and then later had to get the boost? Like, could you get the booster if you? Does the booster work the same if you never got the original? Because
is
I
it
feel
the
like
same shot?
this is gonna create an additional set of problems later for the. Okay, how did you get caught? Let's go to that. How did
okay,
you?
then it got out of control where it just became much bigger than I thought. Where I'd come to work, I have 150 desperate, crying people at my door. I mean, it really shakes you when you see a 6'4", 200-pound firefighter, buff Jack guy crying because he's so desperate. So it was getting out of control.
And when you say desperate,
So
you mean desperate to keep his job, desperate
right,
to,
right.
quote unquote, comply with the law,
Right.
doesn't
But
want to get the
desperately,
vaccine.
yeah, but
Yeah.
desperately, truly afraid of getting the vaccine, especially people who had to worry about, like, I had a lot of like pilots because they were like, "Look, if I get this vaccine and in 3 years they find out it's bad, I lose my permanent flight status, for medical reasons. So do I give up this job now to save my future career? or do I get the vaccine to keep my job now, and then my future career is in jeopardy?
Crazy. So
Tell me about.
how
So
many
okay,
people do you
so it got
think how
crazy.
many
It
people did you not jab?
over 4,000
Those are
in
rookie
six
numbers. Those are
in
rookie
six
numbers.
months.
Yeah.
In six
Oh,
months.
that's
Well,
pretty
I
good.
only
That's pretty good.
yeah.
Did
You faked vaccines for 4,000 people.
Over 4,000. I can't, the number of COVID vaccines that were attributed to me in the database was 4,600, but I'm always very clear to say a lot of those are real, some of them are real. It's you can't really tell who really got one and who didn't because the titers it won't show that
So,
because the
because you
COVID
would
vaccine wears off
enter
fast.
the people who didn't get it, the ones that just got the squirt but not the jab, were entered and treated exactly the same, other than
Yeah,
the millimeter of skin contact.
yeah, they
Okay.
had to be because
So
of the registry.
if they never got a referral, did you kind of lean them in one direction? Like, do you really want it?
No,
Wink, wink.
no, no,
Okay.
no.
How'd you
But
get
what
caught?
happened?
How'd you get
Okay,
caught?
so what happened was it got crazy,
You got
and I didn't
caught,
want to
right?
interfere.
Are you just
Yeah,
calling to brag? What is
no, I got caught. So it got crazy. I knew I couldn't handle it during my regular hours. So I hired a nurse and a secretary to work a second shift at my office.
to not deliver? You hired additional staff to not
Yeah.
deliver.
Yeah.
This is an
They were
efficiency.
like-minded people. They were
Okay.
like-minded people.
Okay. Very
But,
efficient.
right. Well, but, and
You
then,
scaled up your illegal operation.
so
Okay.
then in order to be able to afford 2 additional employees, because remember, I was running a practice for 10 years. So I was a business person. It was my own, my own practice. So
And you
I'm
were a
like, okay,
pediatrician.
no, pediatric nurse practitioner.
Pediatric nurse, okay. But that's
Yeah.
still kids,
So-
right? You had like
Yeah.
the small furniture,
Yeah.
and then there's all these
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
firefighters
Oh,
in
yeah.
full gear
Yeah, yeah.
just
It was
lined out the
adorable.
door. And
It was
These
adorable.
are some big kids.
So,
It's not what you
Yeah.
think. It's fake
well, the
vaccine.
thing is, you have to remember with the COVID vaccine, because they were pushing it and trying to get as many people vaccinated as much, what they said, well, you can offer the COVID vaccine to anybody in the community. They don't have to be just patients. They don't have to be just kids. So I said, well, if I'm going to do that, I'm going to have a second shift that's only COVID vaccines, and I'm going to hire a nurse and a secretary, and they're going to run a second shift. Okay, well, I need to pay a nurse and a secretary, and I need to pay for all the additional expenses of opening a second shift. Now, keep in mind the going rate for a fake COVID vaccine in New York at that time was $500 to $1,000.
what's
Where
a
did you
regular?
find the
What is a
rates?
regular? Yeah, what does a regular COVID cost?
That didn't cost anything.
So it's free for a real one, and
Right.
it was 500 to 1,000 to not get it, to pretend
That
you
was
got
the
it.
that was the going rate.
What'd you
But
charge?
because I charged $220.
Seems pretty reasonable
That's a pretty. That's
Well,
a,
I-
as far as
I mean,
fraud
just-
goes. I mean,
Yeah.
it's-
yeah, you had
despite-
costs associated because you did everything
Yeah.
other than put the medicine or the vaccine into the person.
And yeah, and that's one of the things is one of the biggest criticisms I've gotten since, from people is, oh, you're a grifter, you're doing this for money, you're greedy. And I was like, if I was greedy, I would have been charging 500 to 1,000. I did the math to figure out exactly. I mean, I'm not going to lose money on it. If I'm providing a service, I need to at least break even. So I charged enough.
this was
to
a
cover my
principle.
additional expenses.
This was your real beliefs. This was a principled thing for you. This was not, look, you're already doing okay. Like, you're not trying to get rich quick. You
Right.
You saw a need.
You have
I just-
beliefs.
You're filling it
Yeah.
at break even.
And I'm not anti-vaccine. I've had 2 COVID doses of COVID vaccine. I'm just anti-mandate because I just think mandates, number one, mandating a vaccine does not make more people get the vaccine. It just, people will always find a way.
Okay.
And now you've ruined your public health data because you think 85% of the population got it, but then you wonder why your vaccine doesn't work. Well, because maybe only 60% got it. So it ruins your public health data. And then it destroys people's trust in the government and the medical establishment because now as a medical provider, you're an agent of the government. So it's just not good.
What do you think about the vaccine now after, 3-4 years? What do you think it's done? Positive, negative, or?
I think if you're somebody who's over 65 years of age that has certain medical conditions where getting COVID is more dangerous, that the risk of COVID is higher, or if you choose, this is what's crazy. I'm all about choice. Like if they had told me, oh, people want this vaccine, but don't give it to them because of their race or their age or their gender, which was also happening in New York at that time, people would want the COVID vaccine, but oh, you're the wrong racial profile, so you're a low priority, so you don't get it. I
Which
don't
was
feel
low
like that.
priority?
You mean in the law? I mean, you can look that up. I don't want to say
Well, not
anything that
you, but what did they
I,
consider?
You're using a fake name, and
Yeah.
you've
Yeah,
admitted
we
to
don't know
giving
who-
Yeah.
4,000
we
people
don't know who
fake.
you are.
Yeah.
Yeah,
we don't know who you
we're
are.
not going to hold
But
it
what are
against
other people?
you. Yeah.
What was the low priority for
there,
others?
okay. In order to get the COVID vaccine in the beginning, you had to be either a level, you had to go online and you had to enter questions, and then you would be given a level priority 1, 2, or 3. Priority 1, okay, this week, these next 2 weeks, you're doing priority 1s. And 2 weeks later, priority 2s, and then a month later,
So that's
priority
like
3s.
elderly, the obese, stuff like that.
Well, kind of what you would hope, but instead it was certain racial demographics were put at priority 1.
Can we rank them?
Huh?
We're
Like,
gonna
where
lose
you
we're
had
gonna
it.
lose sponsors we haven't even signed yet. Okay. How did you get caught?
Okay, so long story short, it was crazy. And this guy came in one day and he said, his son was a friend of the practice and had gotten a COVID vaccine. He came in the week before and got a COVID vaccine. Okay, fine. He comes in, he says, I need my second dose. Okay, but I'm not going to pay for it. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? And he's like, well, I'm not paying for it. And I have my friend here and you're going to help her out. And in fact, I'm going to be coming around once a month with friends of mine and you're not going to charge us anything. And I would expect a payment of like about 500 so basically extortion. He was threatening me with extortion and blackmail.
Who's this guy?
And that
Who's this?
Tom-
Now wait. Now we're grifting the grift.
his name is and he lives in a $6 million house in Sag Harbor because I'm a creep and I Googled him.
Wow.
And he was,
So we'll bleep that out. But
all right, fine.
so okay, so this guy in a $6 million house, you think
And
he's
he probably-
organized crime? Do you
listen.
think he's like a mafiosa?
Well, listen, you got to understand at that time, everybody knew 6 different people that could get them a COVID card. The problem is everybody was charging a lot of money and I was doing it on the cheap. So he probably had 50 doctors across Long Island that he was shaking down for money over this. I mean, he seemed really professional and really organized.
Wow.
So he came in and that was the very first inkling that I felt like, wait a minute, is this Breaking Bad? Like, I'm a boring soccer mom. Like, I'm not, this isn't like,
You were doing
Wait,
it for what
oh.
you thought was good.
yeah. And I'm like, wait, I somehow stumbled into a really seedy situation.
And the Don,
And-
so the Don comes by. He
Yeah.
starts saying, "I'm bringing other people by.
Hey,
Don't ask
listen.
names."
It's a real
Yeah.
dangerous world out there. I'd hate for one of your
Yeah,
people to
yeah.
accidentally actually get vaccinated, you know? It's
And
a
and
real
the problem
jabby on the
is-
streets. You
right.
want your people to be
And the problem
untouched.
is, you guys don't know me.
Could you
Right.
imagine Goodfellas, them getting pinched for opening up a truck and it's just a bunch of fake vaccine cards instead of cigarettes?
Oh no, that's real. I saw them. I saw people who were like, "Hey, you need a car?" Like in the parking lots. It was like people selling drugs.
So was this
It was
was
off
this
the
the
rails.
Don?
Well, no, it was like
ratted you
people
out?
not selling drugs.
Right, the opposite. You're in trouble for not selling drugs.
Right. And I have like if you saw me, like I'm a redhead. I have a little bit of a fuck you personality. I try to keep it under control. I
already
try to
said
keep
Long
the beast
Island,
in the
yeah.
cage. I try to keep the beast in the cage, but every now and then he sneaks out. And at the very wrong moment, that beast came out of the cage, and I said, "Look, I'm not playing this game with you. I'm not going to spend the next God knows how long paying you off. If you're going to do it, you're going to do it, and we'll just deal with it. So get off my property, or I'm going to call the cops on you." And he refused to get off the property, and he started insulting my staff and me. And I called the cops, and the cops came, and I said, "Look, this guy's threatening that if I don't pay him money, he's going to make up this cockamamie story that I'm doing fake COVID cards, and that feels like extortion and blackmail. So could you please take him away?" And they
Wow.
did. And then the DA offered him immunity if he testified against me.
I knew that was coming. I knew the deal was
Yeah.
coming.
Yeah. So
So he was charged with like extortion.
no.
No, you said
No.
they took him away. Did they arrest him?
Well, no, they wrote out a police report and they said, "Look, you need to leave the property. Go." And then I could have, but my lawyer told me, "Look, it's not going to go anywhere because he's one of the witnesses they have that
Okay.
against you."
So then what are
they're
you
not-
charged with?
I was charged with felony forgery and providing a false instrument for filing. And then because I always tell people, like with Trump, we've learned a lot about the judicial system. They stack charges. So then they also charged me with money laundering because I was paying my half of the mortgage out of my business account. And I thought that's why you ran a business, is so that you could pay your bills with the money that you make from it. So my lawyer even told them, look, both bank accounts were with the same bank and they were both in her name. So either she's the worst money launderer in history or it's not money laundering.
Right.
And they said, well, we decided that we're going to call it money laundering. So it's money laundering. So now I'm facing two trials instead of one. And then it starts to become, okay, well, if you're not, now you got to convince two juries. And now it's another 100,000. Like I was $250,000 in legal fees. For me to go to trial on the two of these, it would have been another $200,000. And I didn't have the money. I ran out of money. So I took a plea deal. But what my question for you is, it's the stuff that happened before that. Because I feel like maybe they crossed the line from regular like treatment to bullying, and I've had a couple of people who were friends who are lawyers say, I think you might have a case for violation of your civil rights. And so I wanted to just run them by you.
Yeah.
If that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Please.
So, there's the little stuff like they refuse to let me call my lawyer. They refused to let my lawyer do a wellness check, but that was just the whole 24 hours of the arrest process. Trump and I were indicted at the same time in New York, which is kind of nice because he took the media shade off me.
That's good. That's good. Push you back to page 3. That's good.
Yep. I was arrested in January of 2022. They didn't get around to the indictment until the following April. When I was indicted, the DA, the prosecutor representing the DA, was asked by the judge, so what do you want to do now that she's indicted? And he said, look, Your Honor, she's not a flight risk. She's been completely cooperative. We know where she is at all times. She's a business owner, a homeowner. We're not worried. It's been over a year and she hasn't run away. So we don't think she's going to run away. So we're not worried. And then my lawyer said, of course, Your Honor, we agree. I agree. And then the judge said, well, I want her to be under house arrest with an ankle monitor. I'm like, oh, okay. First time offender, clean record, behaving, not misbehaving, but that's what he decided. My lawyer said, okay, we're going to go to the appeals court. So he got the appeals court to hear the case. He called me and said, they agreed to hear the case. You don't need to do anything. You don't need to come. I'll take care of it. Okay, great. And then the next day he called me and says, hey, they heard the case. It looks really good because both me and the DA's representative agree. How often does the appeals court get a case this easy where both sides agree? And usually they have to pick a side. So you're going to be able to go to your cousin's wedding next weekend. Everything will be fine. And I'm like, okay, good. Because, the ankle monitor and the house arrest. And he said, they're going to send me the paperwork tomorrow. They're going to tell me their final answer tomorrow morning. Okay, great. He says, but I don't expect it to be anything other than, okay, fine. Well, then the next day he called me and he's like, they decided not to hear the case. And I said, what do you mean they decided not to hear the case? They already heard the case. He said, yeah, they just called me and said they're deciding not to hear the case. Now, my lawyer had been a criminal defense attorney for 30 years. And every time I heard him say, I have never seen this before. I'm kind of out in the weeds on this. I have no idea. I've never seen it. He's like, I've defended rapists and murderers. I've never seen anyone raked over the coals or treated like you. So there's this whole them agreeing to hear the case and then refusing to hear the case. So I spend 8 months of my life with an ankle monitor under house arrest. Now,
what is your current position?
I'm serving probation. So I've
for
been
how long? What was the final sentencing?
5 years probation and 840 hours of community service.
Okay. And the appeal was thrown out.
That was about the ankle monitor. That was before I even, that was just after the indictment.
Okay.
So then I get a call in July. They have to postpone your court date because they arrested this Gilgo Beach serial killer. They have to reassign the chief prosecutor from your case because the optics won't look good to have the chief prosecutor for the county assigned to you when they have a serial killer to prosecute.
Now, was he actually a serial killer, or was he just pretending to be a serial killer and then the victims were actually living a different life, like working at a chicken shop in New Mexico?
Well, they haven't completely completed the prosecution of that case.
So maybe.
Maybe. Have you heard of the Gilgo Beach serial killer? Yeah. Okay. Well, he was my neighbor, it turns out. And
you need to move.
Oh, we did.
Your
We're
neighborhood, yeah. You, I think it's a long.
GTFO New York. No, we GTFO'd New York. We
You don't
left
have
New
to say
York.
where you are.
What's the current address?
No. Yeah, right. No, that's what's crazy. After my sentencing, this stupid woman from the press is like asking me questions. And she's like, "Oh, so I heard you moved and you're out of New York." I'm like, yeah, she's like, "So where are you living now?" And I said, "You go first." And she looked confused. And I was like, you tell everybody where you live, and then I'll tell everybody where I live. But you
So
go first.
you've been through. You've gone through a lot has happened. Okay.
Okay, so this is the part that's really important. So they decide to postpone the case. My lawyer says, I'm going to take my family on vacation because we're not going
To
to court
Gilgo
next week.
Beach?
So I'm going to, no, to the Dominican Republic. But he's out of the country. Okay, so that's important. My lawyer's out of the country. A week later, I'm at home at 9 o'clock at night in my pajamas helping my kid with math. And the cops come to the door and they say, "We have to arrest you. There's a bench warrant because you missed your court date." And my husband and I are like, "No, the court date was changed. It was rescheduled." And they said, "Well, we're just doing our job. You can take it up with the judge tomorrow. Just go change your clothes into something court worthy that's not, that's warm, blah, blah, blah." The problem is unfortunately, this was the first time my son had to see me put in cuffs and taken out of the home. So that had some real emotional, long-term effects on him. So I'm just noting that.
Okay.
On the way to the precinct, they're like, "Look, it's just a bench warrant. You'll see the judge tomorrow. It's probably an oversight, whatever." I'm like, "Okay, fine." Well, then we get to the precinct, and my bench warrant magically turned into an arrest warrant. So they had to then divert me, and then two other cops had to take me to the correctional facility and put me in prison in a jumpsuit. And I haven't even been to trial yet. And so I'm there, and then another computer error, because in the end they said this was all four separate computer errors and documentation errors. Their computer had me assigned to a solitary cell instead of general population. So because of four separate computer errors, I was taken out of my home in cuffs in front of my son, thrown in a solitary cell. And the next morning when I saw the judge said, "Oops, our bad. It was a mistake. Here's your release papers." So he said, "Listen, this is important. It could take 72 hours for the computers to update. So you're going to sign this document. I'm going to sign it. Your lawyer's going to sign it. These are release papers. If you get pulled over on the way home, or if somebody comes to your door, you just show them the release papers and they'll realize, oh, there was a mistake. Fine." And then the substitute attorney, because my lawyer was out of the country, the substitute attorney's like, "Okay, well, I wish you luck. You can meet your husband out front." Okay, great. I'm going home. And then they take me in the back, and then they put me back in a cell, and then they put me back on a bus, and they put me back in that solitary cell for another
Oh
9 hours.
wow.
And
Jeez.
at every single step of the way, I showed them my release paper. My hands were still in handcuffs. If I could ever give anyone advice, if your lawyer, don't let your lawyer leave your side while you're still in handcuffs.
Yeah.
Because my lawyer's like, "Peace out." And then, so I showed them.
So what are they saying
holding
when you're
cell.
saying I'm supposed to be released and they keep
Well,
processing?
they said our computer says otherwise. And the first guy said, "Yeah, well, the judge is in the next room. You could ask him." And they said, "We don't feel like it." So then when I asked them, I said, "Well, could you make a phone call?" "We don't feel like it." So every step of the way it was, "We don't feel like it." And I said, "I am showing you my release papers. Every correctional officer, every prison guard, every court officer, I showed them my release papers. I said, the judge said the computers could take 72 hours to update. That's why he gave me these release papers."
Yeah. So how long did you end up staying in there?
Well, at 9 o'clock that night, so now we're at 24 hours. I finally traded an apple and a container of milk to, slid it through the little opening in the door and traded it to another inmate to call my husband. She called my husband, and my husband's first
What, you traded like an
reaction-
apple for their cell phone?
No, I traded an apple and a milk for them to go to the prison phone
Okay.
to use their phone credits to
Okay.
call my husband.
Okay.
So they called my husband, and then they relayed the message. The first thing my husband said is, "Where the hell have you been? Where are you?" I said, "I'm back in the solitary cell." He's like, "Everyone's been looking at you. I was sitting out in front of the courthouse for like an hour. I finally got a hold of your lawyer in the DR. He called the district attorney's office. They called the judge, and everybody said, 'We don't know where she is. She was released.'" She was released at 11 o'clock. We don't know where she went. We don't know where she is. So
Holy
he's
cow.
like, yeah. So he's like, look, I got to get off the phone and call your lawyer. I'm like, fine. So then about an hour later, the probation officer comes in to release me and put my ankle monitor back on because when you're in an ankle monitor, they take it off when you're in prison and then they put it back on when you're released. And he said something very interesting. He said, oh, we've been looking for you since our computer said you were released at noon. We thought you would cut and run. So their computer updated at noon to say, hey, this person is being released, but you need to go put an ankle monitor on them. And then when they went to do that, everyone's like, well, I don't know where she is. So they thought I hopped in my husband's car and bolted for Mexico or wherever they don't. And for 9 hours, they were like, we don't know where she is. We can't find her. We don't know.
And you're just
So
sitting
they
there
were,
in solitary.
yeah. So they literally lost me in the system and they were ready to call out like a tri-statewide APB for a missing, person. So I like, that's interesting because they've been telling me for the last 9 hours that their computers haven't updated yet, and that's why they can't let me go. The only other thing I want to add that I think is appropriate is I was finally sentenced in September, and I was sentenced, but I was told complete your community service hours, and if good behavior, you don't get any more trouble, you finish community service hours, they might be able to take some time off your sentence. Great. I'm a hard worker. I would like to get started doing that. Well, then they kept postponing my sentencing. They postponed it month by month for a total of 8 months until I finally told my lawyer, I said, look, you can't let them do this again. They are essentially adding time to my sentence because I can't request to be released from probation until I finish my community service hours. And I can't finish my community service hours until I start them. And I can't start them until I'm sentenced. So a 5-year sentence now could have turned into almost a 6-year sentence. Like, there's got to be some legal way that they can't just do this. They could just keep postponing it for 2 years. So finally, this past September, I was finally sentenced. And you remember this all started in January 2022.
Right.
So I was finally sentenced. I started my community service hours. Then a month ago, two guys in suits show up at my door, and I'm out in the sticks. I'm not going to tell you where I am, but it's like bears, deer, 30,000 acre. Like, we are in the sticks. We are like as off the grid as you can get and still have Wi-Fi. And these two guys in suits and these three local police officers are at my door. The two guys in suits are at my door. The three police officers are wearing bulletproof vests, their hands on their holsters, and tactical positions on my property, like Ruby Ridge style. And I come to the door and I'm just me. Like, I'm like a grandma. I'm like a sweet grandmother. I'm like,
What do they say?
Martha
What do they
Stewart.
say? I'm sorry, we got other
They
callers on
said,
hold. Yeah.
oh, I know.
You're doing
They said,
you should write a screenplay though because you're
uh,
doing a really good job of describing everything. So what do they say when they
they
come to your
said
door?
you're being served in civil court now. We're suing you in civil court, and your court date's November, and we need to serve you a subpoena.
Who's the we that's suing you in civil court?
New York State Department of Health.
Okay.
So, but that's just like, a little bit of like they were putting on a show. Like, I asked my husband, I'm like,
Is that still
20 years
active?
as a
Is that
cop.
lawsuit still active?
Yeah, that one's still coming up.
And what are they alleging in that suit?
Falsifying vaccines, I guess that kind of thing.
And then what are they asking for?
They're gonna find me money that
How much?
I don't know. They haven't really given us details for how many charges is per charge and how many charges. So
Yeah.
it's that one, it still hasn't been resolved. So, I don't really want to go into that one too much. It's just, I did look at my husband. I'm like, is this typical for when you're serving a subpoena? And he was like, no, it is totally
Definitely
not
not.
typical.
So,
Yeah.
Bill, what are your
So
thoughts so far?
So I want to make sure I understand the real concern here. It sounds like there's two different issues.
Three or more.
I mean, well, maybe core issues. It sounds like the core of it is that day when you were wrongfully detained for many hours, both that day and the impact that it had. Is that kind of the core question of kind of what are your
yeah,
options? Okay.
yeah, like, my kid and my family, like, we live on a dead end street. Every now and then, an Amazon truck coming down the street, and I see the look in my son's eyes. I see the look in my husband's eyes. I feel my own blood pressure go up. It's like PTSD that every time somebody comes down, my son is like, "Oh my God, are they taking my mom away again?"
Yeah.
And my
Yeah.
husband's like, "Oh my God, what's going to happen?" Like, like earlier today, I'm pulling down a side street leading to my street. There's a police car in the corner. I'm like, okay, no big deal. I'm not driving fast. I'm driving, But it's like, why is this guy sitting outside my neighborhood? Like,
You
there's
feel like you're
this.
being treated like a continually dangerous criminal, and you want to face the music and live your life, and
Yeah, I
you don't
just
want to
want to
be
move on.
harassed. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So here's this is a very interesting world. So a lot of folks will talk about kind of false imprisonment, but I will tell you
Hmm.
that no matter what happens, if it happens by the government, the ones who create the rules, it's not really false imprisonment, which is, can be a crime, can be a civil issue. Really, what we're talking about is the civil rights violation. So when the government is doing something wrong, whether it's a wrongful arrest, maybe that's a malicious prosecution, something along those lines. And there's really what I would call two major places you can go about doing this. And I'm going to add another angle onto this that you may or may
Hmm.
not like, but we'll do it in a second. The first one, we deal with the government. There are attorneys that specifically focus on wrongful detainment. You are one of thousands, if not tens of thousands of people who have had to deal with in various jurisdictions computer errors that have led to extreme detainment. Like, we're talking a year lost in jail. People, not in the
Mm.
US, not very common in the US, but in other countries, they'll get lost in the system and no one will come and they will die in prison, or not
Hmm.
actually prison. They'll do a post or pre-conviction jail, and they will die there
Yeah.
because no one even knows that they're there. So very fortunate that this was short-lived, but clearly had a very important impact. So that first aspect is going to be a civil rights attorney that specifically deals with wrongful imprisonment by the government. That is a civil rights issue. There's both New York Constitution and U.S. constitutional issues that get involved with that. Section 1983, you can Google it, but we're going to send you some resources related to attorneys who deal with that specific issue because it's super narrow. Some criminal defense attorneys deal with it, but I will tell you they have to have specific experience related to that issue. But the second thing I want to raise is what your attorney did in that time that it happened. Because to
Hmm.
me, that really reeked of attorney malpractice that tangibly led to big problems for you. It probably not only led to additional costs, but it also led to, what I think you're accurately describing as PTSD for you and your family. And there's
Hmm.
two things you can do there. One, there are claims you can file related to attorney malpractice on a civil side. You probably don't have monetary damages. It might be kind of difficult to prove that, as any kind of trauma is hard to prove. But at the very least, there are state of New York grievance committees where you can make ethical complaints against lawyers. Is that going to come back and undo it? No. But understanding that the government has acknowledged that your lawyer has done wrong through pursuing that. They pursue it on their own. You don't have to pay for that. You don't have
But
to
why?
go do
What
it.
was the malpractice of my attorney if he was out of the country? And I mean, he did get back. Like, we tried calling him, like when the cops were
Sure,
trying to
sure.
call him, but he was out of the country. And unfortunately, he did call back as soon as he could. It just happened to be a half hour after
You're
I
talking
was
about the
taken away.
rental
Well,
attorney, right?
well, I'm talking about the attorney who was down in the Caribbean, but maybe I misheard it, but I really heard in that moment something where he's gone away, he's not there anymore. There
No,
was a
no, no. Yeah,
confusion about that issue, and that it
no.
sounded like there was something that he may have needed to be doing at that moment.
No, he told me, he says, well, if our court date is rescheduled, I'm going to take my family out of, on vacation
Sure.
and expected to be available by cell phone. But in the moment that it happened, when as soon as like 20 minutes after I was taken away, my husband told me later, look, he did call back and he was extremely up. He was like, I am so sorry. I don't think I'm getting good cell service here. I just got like 15 calls from you. What is going on?
Gotcha.
So then he was like, this is a huge mistake. And then he called to get a substitute attorney. He told my husband, don't worry, she will have representation. It will
Yeah.
be somebody. It's just not me. I just suspect that, the timing is really convenient that this all happened when they knew, as a criminal defense attorney, the DA knew his schedule because he worked at the courthouse. Like,
Sure.
they knew,
Sure.
oh, Mr. So and so, oh, you're going to be out of the country next week on vacation.
Yeah.
Like, it just is very coincident, very
I
interesting
see. I
that they
see. I
knew
see what you're saying, and I mean, most attorneys in most jurisdictions, especially ones that regularly appear in court, they have a thing called a vacation letter that says, "Hey, I'm going to be out during this time. Don't schedule anything during these times." So
Right.
it is for our listeners. You might think, well, how would they know where this one lawyer is going to be? It's actually not that uncommon. I mean,
Oh, no,
even
I
this morning,
assume they knew.
yeah, I've
Yeah,
done
I
that.
assume
So
they knew. In fact, that's why it was suspicious to me because I'm like, oh, they knew he was going to be out of the country for a week. And then this happened?
right, right. So then I would go back to the first issue, and I want to hear what Josh and Matt have to say about this. But my thing is that this is a civil rights issue. The you know, whether it was a negligent error, maybe folks are kind of putting their thumb on the scale, or maybe it was just a specific targeting. At the end of the day, you were wrongfully detained. You had additional allegations made against you about being a flight risk, having been a fugitive on the run while you're sitting there cooling your heels in solitary confinement, trying to get your apple juice together to trade for a phone call, which is absolutely absurd. It is, the justice system run amok. But Josh, counterpoints, Matt, thoughts?
Let's hear Matt first.
Me first. Wow. Well, I mean, like, I feel like you were, they treated you like you were a convicted murderer, right?
They treated me worse. Like my lawyer said, he'd been defending murderers and rapists for 30 years. And he's like, and a lot of them were guilty. And I've never seen them break you over the coat. Like they took our home. They took
Yeah.
all of my money. They debanked me. They took my license, permanently revoked, took my business. They took our home. They put a lien on our house. They forced like this, and then my husband's job, a whole nother story, but like, they forced him off the job because he's married to me, even though he didn't know anything. Like, and I just feel like they were bullying. There's a difference between judicial prosecution and persecutorial bullying.
Yeah.
So
And I
Matt,
feel like they crossed the line.
So Matt, what do you feel about this whole story? How does it make you feel as a comedian and a bystander hearing all this?
Well, when it comes to the vaccination in general, or just overall with this case,
just this case,
Well,
this case.
I mean, I first of all, I want to know if Antonio Brown was one of your guys that got one of the fake faxes. Two, it's more so, it's like it seemed like you were trying to do the right thing by your own needs. You weren't forcing anybody. You weren't picketing outside saying, "Hey, don't take this vax. It's gonna give you warts on your nose," or whatever it may be. But I think you had best interests, and I think it got a little bit carried away, and pretty much like any actual drug dealing TV show, but non-drug dealing TV show. I just wish you luck, honestly. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Everybody kept saying it was like Breaking Bad meets Scrubs.
Yeah.
I think that
Yeah.
you gotta try to sell the rights to your story to cover your legal and your other expenses here. The big thing for me is I think it's no good deed goes unpunished, or the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Either one of those, you could take your pick there. We're not going to get into the politics of the mandate and all the other stuff. There's channels for that, and there's a place for that. This channel is about how do we help individual people, right? Not larger policy conversations. How do we help people? And I don't care if you were a serial killer. We haven't had a serial killer call the show yet, but
That we know of.
Well, I might be able to reach out to my neighbor if he'll answer my call.
yeah, we'd love to have him. But we really, as a lawyer, we are trained to kind of separate the issues and to evaluate each one. So whatever did or did not happen in those rooms, which you did, I mean, you told us, so but like whatever did or did not happen with the vaccinations, that's one issue. You still have to be proven guilty. You still are entitled to due process. We live in a country where it doesn't really matter what you did. They can't they're not supposed to be able to show up in the middle of the night without a trial, without a warrant, throw you away, call it a computer error. No one knows where you are. That's some problematic stuff. That's scary, whether you're innocent or you're guilty. That's scary to everyone. So I think that all of us were concerned, not just for you, but for what kind of country we're living in when you told us about the computer errors. I think we want to try to hook you up with a civil rights expert specifically. There's some people, if you are a civil rights attorney and you want to get involved in this, reach out to us. We'll patch you through, but we also have some resources that we're going to send to you.
Can I
jump in?
Normally, Josh, when I give some very legal answers and some kind of analysis there, Josh has a very practical approach. And I want to at least throw this out there. I know Josh was kind of joking about selling your story or whatnot, but this is a really fascinating look that
I wasn't
most
joking.
people, right, and
Yeah.
so not joking, because I actually do think that people really misunderstand how much technology and a few clicks of a button or a typo or just a little bit of I don't give a shit from a low paid government worker can wreak havoc on our lives. And I think people would be fascinated by your story. The only reason I really mention that is because we're gonna get you with some of these folks and the civil rights lawyers and what's not, and there may be some organizations that are particularly interested in clearing up the system and have a history of having to deal with folks who have been in your situation. One thing that I'll just reemphasize is it's not going to fill the void or turn around the trauma. That will just take its own turn in time, and it sounds like you're doing a lot of things to try and put your family in the best position for that. So I want to temper your expectations, because the reality is that the government makes the rules. They also make the forum where you go get to decide whether the government followed the rules or not.
Right.
And so there's probably, I could almost guarantee you that even if you won a civil rights complaint and you found that this guy making whatever the minimum wage is in a New York City jail, screwed it up, and this guy he's probably doesn't even work there anymore, he got laid off or something, that it's not going to change your life in any kind of meaningful way or change that fear that I truly believe you feel. I mean, literally every lawyer who deals with wrongful arrests talks about the trauma that comes from it, because you go from thinking I'm going to be treated fairly, all I do is like soccer, is that really a crime? That's a topic for another episode.
It is.
Yeah, we were going to say it's a crime, but that what you can do is take your story forward. I love the energy you're bringing to it. You're very practical about it. Like Josh said, you've got a lot of details. So we're not your lawyer and we're not your movie agent, but we're here to say that your story is compelling. The heart you put into it is compelling. There are some potential legal options that we'll connect you with after the show. But man, what a fucking ridiculous situation. It makes me fearful.
If you need a douchebag to play the neighbor that was trying to extort you, I would like to throw my hat in there.
Well, I mean, look, I would love to. I can't tell you how many times people say, you should write a book. You should make a movie. I'm like, okay. Or no, the big thing, oh, you should talk to this guy. I'm like, okay, get a movie producer on the phone with me. I'll talk. Like, oh, sure, I would love to.
We know some people.
But
Let's see if we can't get you someone
We
on
can.
the phone for
We
that.
can get you to some folks like that.
Sometimes it's not the medicine you ask for; it's the one you need. And you make a couple $1 million selling your life story, and suddenly
That'd be awesome.
this other
It's the
stuff.
medicine you don't need.
Yeah, sometimes it's the medicine that you pretend. Sometimes it's the medicine that you pretend to take that you may or may not have needed, and then you.
I hope
create
that was the comedian who said that.
It was.
It was.
Wednesday, you've got an incredibly heartbreaking story of trying to do the right thing as you saw it, and how it really spiraled into something that may have been a simple computer error, may have been malicious on the part of the government. Do you feel like you were heard, and
Yeah,
are you
I
good
mean,
with
to
us
be
sending you
honest-
some of this information?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, the legal stuff, okay, yeah, whatever. But it's really, like I told your call, the screen, it's really about, I want to get this story out. It's like a pebble in my shoe. And the reason is because we all know so many stories, not just Trump, but this two-tier justice system, where we could get to a point where if you have the wrong bumper sticker on your car and you get a speeding ticket and then you go to traffic court, the judge says, well, normally I only make you pay a fine, but I know you're one of those crazy MAGA right-wing extremists, so I'm going to put you in jail for 14 days.
Well-
Because, my husband pointed out, most people get speeding tickets. They don't realize the maximum sentence that a judge could pick for a speeding ticket is 14 days in jail. It's just they never do it.
Right.
They never
But they
do
could
it.
choose to if they don't like
But
you.
they could choose to. And my case is an example of what happens when they decide that for political reasons, they're going to hammer you with the maximum at every step.
Well,
make an
Wednesday,
example of you.
thank you for speaking up. Thank you for sharing your story. We have other callers on the line. We're going to have to get
Yep.
to them, but we're going to stay in touch, and we're going to try to get you the help that you need. Thank you for coming on the show.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Wednesday. Wow.
Woo!
I got to tell you, that it's shocking when people have this, but I'm not kidding. Like, these stories happen all the time. All the time. People who are like, arrested in the wrong house because they happen to be somewhere, they happen to have the same name, and they're at the grocery store, they're flying, and all of a sudden TSA is like, wow, are you the same Mohammed, blah blah blah. I mean, I'm joking, but I'm serious. The underlying facts are there, and it takes a lot of people to be paying attention to prevent those things from happening.
I mean, we have created a feeling of war in the political climate that we have in this country, and COVID was at the maximum height of this. Like we're hearing this now, years later. I live in Texas. The show is shot in Texas. Guess what? We just don't talk about COVID. We don't have at this point in time. We just don't have opinions either way. Life goes on. But in New York, 3-4 years ago, at this situation, kind of ground zero of the pandemic for the United States, nothing was more serious to people on both sides of the aisle. We heard from her. I can't even imagine how angry some of the people that are on the other side of the aisle. She's on one side of the aisle. She's like,
Sure.
Oh yeah. Now you imagine how a prosecutor that thinks that she was endangering grandmas. That's where the paperwork gets lost, right? Like to me, this entire picture is clear. She decided to fake 4,000 or whatever. And there are people that decided to throw the book at her every single way that they could.
Yeah.
There are people that went out of their, just like she went out of her way for her beliefs. There's people on this other side that are going, oh, you're a monster because you fake these things. Now all these people are going to, and she is going to fight and is fighting an incredibly uphill battle. She's not going to get a fair shake. People are going to do everything they can to lose the paperwork, everything they can to make a political statement, because this is not about right, wrong, or the law right now. It's about, I feel like it's been politicized.
Yeah, 100%. It's people looking to prove themselves, and they're using people as the weapon to do it, or the scapegoat for their own political feelings, instead of recognizing that the true enemy is Canada.
You're not a victim. you're not. You literally frauded 4,600 fake COVID things, and whether you believe it or not, it was clearly illegal. You weren't.
You knew you were breaking the law. You hired employees. You scaled up. She brought entrepreneurialism to the lawbreaking.
Yeah, and then she's like, I wasn't trying to make money. So you brought in more people to do more. Who the fuck works more to make less money?
Mahatma Gandhi.
Yeah, well, how'd that work out?
Yeah, no. So here's the thing I always say about this idea, and this is an apolitical statement in the sense that it applies to everyone on either side.
Just say the shit.
Is y'all, civil disobedience is disobedience. So when you flirt with breaking the law, you got to live with the consequences of that. Now, I will say, like, I'll tell you one example. I was asked by a federal judge to represent a gentleman he tried to attempt murder. He tried to hack a guy to death with an axe. Yeah. When they came to arrest him. He tried to hack a deputy to death. He didn't get the deputy. They put him in jail. But while he was in jail, we were able to discover that prison guards in the local jail had been set up special areas in the jail where they could physically abuse the prisoners outside of the view of the cameras. Yeah. So regardless of what I feel about hacking deputies to death or whether that guy should, he still has rights. Yeah. And so in that small moment of the computer era, I feel that. On the larger issue, I mean, you kind of you ask for bad things to happen. But it was one fucking day,
too, wasn't it? Like, wasn't like a 12-hour day? Like,
I mean, I've been to a family reunion. It felt like jail.
Yeah,
we've all had a weekend with the boys where we drank a little too much, threw on some blackface, went down to a boat. I said threw on some black. Look, we've all had a weekend with the boys where we partied.
Ambiguously legal.
We've all had a week. If I could get interrupted, guys, this is a tricky rant. When you interrupt me, it sounds more problematic than it is. Yeah. Okay. We've all had a weekend with the boys where we partied a little bit too much, got a little drunk, threw on some blackface, went down to a boat, stole a bunch of tea. Civil disobedience. Okay. We've all done that. We've all been there. But what you have to understand is, as fun as that is for a weekend of throwing tea in the river, there was then a war that was fought right after that. Right. Yeah, so it's like, when you say me and the boys are going to fake 4,600 vaccinated cards, get ready to fight. That's it. There is not I was a small business owner who didn't choose a side. Like, it's going to get real. It's going to get heavy.
It's going to get real.
I was 100% honest with that woman. I didn't pull any punches. And I think her story is interesting. We talked to her for like an hour because of how interesting it was. She should try to sell the movie rights because I don't think they're done coming for her. I think there's going to be people that are going to they're going to get her every way they can.
100%.
If you're tuning in right now, you hated the story, you like the story, you don't like her, you do like her, every aspect of it. If you've had a wrongful imprisonment situation, leave a note in the comments. If you've got a movie director you want us to connect her with, put it in the comments.
We've all gotten a little drunk, dressed up as indigenous people, you know?
Yeah, couple
We've all
times.
handed out smallpox blankets.
Yeah.
All right, it's hardly legal. If you have a crazy legal story and you want to talk to some lawyers anonymously, for free, call us.
Wait, we're not getting paid?
Nothing at all. I don't know how we're going to pay for it, to be honest.